Hey, I'm Stacey Clare, and today I got some really good exposure talking to Meg about sex work, the Nordic model, and secret, underground, illegal stripper parties.
Hello, and welcome to this emergency episode of Really Good Exposure. As you should know, at Really Good Exposure, we believe that all women deserve the right to bodily autonomy and safety at work. We also believe that sex work is work because it is, and it always has been. Recently, the UK government released its proposed changes to the Crime and Policing Bill. And some of these changes would incorporate elements of something called the Nordic Model of criminalising sex work. This model was first implemented in Sweden in 1999, and it criminalises the purchase of sexual services, but not the sale of them. And on paper, this is pitched as a feminist approach, but this model has been proven to increase violence against sex workers everywhere it has been introduced. The Nordic model also doesn't have the support of sex workers, almost all sex worker-led organisations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, or the World Health Organization, all of whom recognise that criminalising the purchase of sex will inevitably increase violence against workers by pushing the industry underground. Today, I've got a very special guest on the podcast who is going to talk to us about not only her work and all the usual goodness that we talk about on the podcast, but most importantly, she's going to tell us why it's so important that we oppose these amendments to the Crime and Policing Bill and how we can make our voices heard before the consultation deadline on the 13th of May. So, I will start by saying the same line I always say, and that is, I'm Megan fucking Prescott. Who the fuck are you, and what do you do?
I'm Stacey fucking Clare, and I am a semi-retired stripper slash sex worker. I'm okay with both. And among the many things that I do, I actually now tour the country doing comedy about stripping and sex work. So I'm gearing up
Amazing.
for Brighton Fringe, Durham Fringe, and Edinburgh Fringe festivals this year.
That's very impressive. You're also a published writer.
I am, yeah.
Right?
I forget that bit.
I'm always so impressed with that. I'm like, you wrote a book. That's amazing.
I wrote a book called The Ethical Stripper, Sex Work and Labour in the Nighttime Economy, which is about, specifically, it was about licensing laws around strip clubs, which happens to come under the Policing and Crime Bill. Well, the Policing and Crime Act 2009 was the law that was written to regulate strip clubs. And so now that same law is the one that's being proposed with, well, amendments are being proposed to it. So it's kind of technically being rewritten with this, these proposed changes to the way that we regulate all sex work.
Would the 2009 changes, would that be the reason why all of a sudden in strip clubs you suddenly had to start doing lap dances from a metre away in Westminster?
Exactly, yeah. So
a very awkward lap dance.
Yeah, well, the Policing and Crime 2009 was the first real piece of legislation that did successfully put a kind of rule around lap dancing. So they created a licensing regime for lap dancing clubs, which hadn't existed previously. It's all a bit complicated, but yeah, it effectively created a kind of a law that said lap dancing could only happen in certain spaces which were licensed, and then anything outside of that was illegal. So it technically, it was actually a form of legalising lap dancing, whilst then creating a sort of two-tier system, because then it actually gave more power to club bosses who had licenses, and anywhere else that was unlicensed either shut down or went super underground. So and that didn't make things better for us. It actually didn't. It made kind of working conditions got worse because club bosses got greedy. They actually had
Yep,
like a
I can attest
monopoly.
to that.
And then, we as workers, we had less power and less choice. So if we didn't like the club that we
Yeah.
worked in, we couldn't just go and work anywhere else, because for a lot of places there might only have been like 1 or 2 licensed strip joints in any city.
Okay, well, that would bring us nicely onto the Nordic
Mhm.
model stuff. But before we get there, I'm going to entice listeners a little bit, because everyone knows that sex sells. We love talking to sex workers. We love hearing about sex workers. So, yes, I would love to ask you to tell us a bit about what an average day in your life looks like. At the point of that is because my neurodivergence when I was younger made me really not understand how people went about their days and how you structure a day. So I ask all of my guests what an average day looks like, kind of to tell the audience that there is no one standard day, and that everybody's working day looks different, and we shouldn't be like conditioned to be like 9 to 5 office job. And I'm sure you've got some interesting days.
Yeah. An average day in my life, it doesn't exist. I am one of the most neurodivergent people I know. I rarely get up before midday, so you've done well getting me up this morning. Um, I'm very still in like stripper time. My, sleeping rhythms and my eating rhythms are always
Yeah.
like much later than most people's. Yesterday, I got up and sent an invoice for a talk that I did in London recently, which was about stripping, at a place called Two Temple Place, which had an exhibition on about the East London Strippers Collective. And so I sent an invoice, and then I started packing my suitcase, because I'm going to Brighton Fringe this week. And then I went into town and I met up with a legend in my community. Joe King is a stripper who was stripping through the 80s and 90s and is now like a burlesque legend. She's like stripper royalty, but not only is she burlesque performer, but she's got the background. She's worked in the strip joints of East London through the kind of golden years. And she was up in Glasgow, where I currently live, for the Festival of Burlesque. And so I went and met her for the afternoon, and we had a riot. I mean, she's kind of like a community elder to me, but she's so funny, so funny. So it was just, we had a giggle, had a couple of coffees, might have had a G&T. Got back and got all of your prep for this podcast. So I was reading through, getting myself ready for this. So that was my day yesterday.
I would love to ask you, like, what first brought you to sex work, stripping, or any different type of sex work that you discovered?
Money. Literally money.
A great point.
I was 22. By that time, had been working for like already since I was a teenager, minimum wage jobs, like, working in cafes, working in waitressing, working behind like supermarket checkouts. Like, I've done a lot of, hourly minimum wage jobs by that point. And I was 22, and by that time I already knew that I wanted to perform, that I loved performing in some way, and that I wanted to use my um how I look, let's say, or
Stacey is gesturing to her body.
my face. And this, obviously, who wouldn't want to make money off this? So I was like, right, how am I going to make money off the way I look? Because I was getting a lot of attention, getting a lot of unwanted male attention as well, as, let's face it. I went and had a look into, modelling. I gave modelling a bash, but that was weird, because they wanted me to do a load of free work. They wanted me to like run around with a portfolio going from like casting to casting, and I was like, but what do I actually get paid? And then, no, you don't actually get
How
paid.
is this sustainable?
Yeah, and I was like, well, I've never in my life not been able to. I've always had to work to get paid. Like, that's what, I don't come from money. I don't have the resources behind me for that kind of lifestyle. So I was like, well, that's not an option. And then I went into sort of like burlesque. I tried to become a burlesque performer. I had the name Jacqueline Hyde. And that was similar. It was like, oh, spending hours and hours getting costumes ready and preparing performances to work in maybe like 1 or 2 burlesque clubs that were only paying like 40 quid or 30 quid a show. I was like, yeah, again, this is a hobby. So I eventually wound up on a night out in a strip joint. Well, actually, I was younger. I was 19 when I first wound up in a night out in a strip joint. Saw the strippers, saw this like, you know, stripper on stage was wearing like a ripped body stocking, like slut. I was like, that's amazing. I could really do
Love a
that.
body
I think I can
stocking.
do that. Definitely I can do that. So couple of years later I wind up in a conversation with a mate of a mate who, well, it was a friend's girlfriend actually, who I met at a party, who was a dancer, and I was like, "Oh, what kind of dancing do you do?" And she was like, "Oh, I'm a stripper actually." I was like, "Oh, really? I actually want to do that. Can you help me?" So she just like gave me the rundown, gave me all the tips on like how to do it well, how to do it safely, how to avoid dodgy customers. Just it was like demystifying it. And then
Yeah.
I got on a couple of auditions in clubs in Glasgow, got accepted by one, and then it was just like a revelation. Like on my first night, I made like 130 quid, which at that
Yeah.
time, and we're talking like this is 18 years ago, at that time, I was, working, it would take me more than a week to earn that much money.
Yeah.
So I just took to it like a duck to water.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I often find that a lot of neurodivergent people actually find creative freelancing in general, but specifically different types of sex work, are the only types of accessible work or sustainable work for them because our brains are just different and we have different
Do you know
skills.
what else I think? I think it's also like a way for us to mask. Like there's a lot of masking going on in sex work. And I think
Yeah.
that it in the outside regular world, I struggled a great deal with social situations and following social cues. And the thing about a strip joint or within sex work, within transactional sex work, you have a framework given to you. Like
Yep.
you're performing a character. And I
Hmm.
quickly learned actually as a performer that the better I was at the performing bit, the more I would get paid. So I learned, first of all, never talk about myself really. Like customers
Mm,
don't want to think of me as someone's sister or someone's daughter, or like just be a fantasy to them. And don't drink,
mm,
don't be high, don't have fag breath. Well, that's personal choice, but I found that there was a lot of things that I was doing that I would be like, oh, I can make more money if I do this. And so I kind of went from being quite a wayward party girl, to be honest, in my kind of regular life, to then suddenly being very like together and having these kind of
yeah.
boundaries, like having these boundaries for myself to set,
Yeah.
because it was rewarded with money.
Yeah. I always say that I learned boundaries from doing sex work.
Wow.
Like, I look back at my life before I ever stripped or did OnlyFans, and I'm like, what was I doing? I wasn't demanding that people respect my boundaries. And in sex work, I just found it was so much more black and
Yeah.
white. And my autism probably comes into that a lot, but I loved it. I was like, no, we're not doing a wishy-washy, like, oh, I'll chat to you. Like in acting a lot, there's lots of blurred lines where it's like, oh, am I supposed to flirt with this director? It feels like he's flirting with me, but I don't know if that's the situation. In sex work, I was like, yeah, he's probably flirting, but if he wants to spend time with me, he needs to pay money. I'm not wasting my time. I'm not doing a free audition. I'm not doing a free coffee to go meet him, whatever. Yeah, I learned all my boundaries from sex work and sex workers.
I've heard that
Um,
so many times. And I think it's one of
Yeah.
the huge misconceptions that people assume sex work is just this total boundaryless, that, you know, you've got no agency, you've got no autonomy as a sex worker, you're just going to be pushed around and people are just going to take advantage of you left, right, and center. And it's not that they don't try, it's just that we have like, when sex work goes well, it's very, very boundaried. It really is. It's my
Yeah.
impression of it.
Yeah. Especially when you for personally, when I compare it to like dating relationships and like personal relationships, comparing that and how I am so much more boundaried with all my relationships
Yeah.
now, healthily boundaried, than I was before. And I look back at how I like not let men treat me like they were the assholes in that situation. But you know, when you're like, I also had a choice to leave, and I had been conditioned by society to be like, no, this is, at least you've got a boyfriend, at least like he likes you. But honestly, sex work also taught me
Yeah.
confidence. I feel like the mainstream acting, mainstream modeling, which I'm sure you've got an experience of, it makes you feel like you have to adhere to these like traditional beauty standards. But sex work, I found like there is something for everybody. Whatever you look like, someone will like that. And I find it insane that people think that the sex industry is what conditions people to think they need to look a certain way, when really I see that more in the mainstream world than in sex work.
Very much so, yeah.
So I imagine that you had a couple of not so great jobs before you came to find sex work. And a lot of the time people ask sex workers like, oh, what's the worst thing that's ever happened in a strip club? Which is very weird, because you wouldn't ask like a doctor, what's the worst thing you've ever seen? But I do like asking people what the worst job they've ever had was, especially people who do sex work, because almost always it's not sex work that was the worst job.
I mean, I've done so many jobs, I'm not gonna lie. As well as not only before sex work, but alongside sex work as well. I think like significantly, I have been working since I was 13 years old, but like I was 13 when I was working in a Chinese restaurant washing dishes for like £3 an hour, and I got like a
Wow.
free dinner at the end. I think I was 12 or 13 when I was working for a pharmacy, doing like, you know, like news rounds, kids newspaper rounds,
Yeah.
repeat prescription delivery for like people who couldn't make it out, you know, couldn't get out. And I would do that after school, every night after school, 5 days a week. Sometimes I was working for like 3-4 hours per evening, and I was getting £12 a week.
Oh,
I know, right? And so of all the jobs I've ever done, like I've done some really, you know, challenging work as well. So I'm proud of the fact that I've done care work um, for all kinds of people, people with cerebral palsy, people with dementia. Some of which was really great, and I was like in a good situation and, you know, paid properly. Some of which I really wasn't. Some of which I was doing like agency
Yeah.
work where I would do contracts to go and live with people for 2 weeks at a time, and I would be paid a daily rate. But when I was then when you break that down into like the hourly rate of like when I was expected to wake up and be, you know, taking care of someone up until bedtime, the hourly rate was something like 2.50 an hour. And I'm like, you know, I'm wiping asses. Like and of course, like that is honorable work. And I have experienced some really kind of amazing, like, yeah, quite life changing sort of that job. Like it's precious, and society should be respecting that job. And yet we reduce it to this like, well, you know, people should take care of each other for free anyway. So why should they get paid? Yeah, so I've done a lot of jobs. I think one of the most interesting jobs as well, I worked in the recycling plant at Glastonbury, so on the bins at Glastonbury,
Glad to know they recycle, but
which was a health hazard to say the least. Some of the most disgusting things I've ever seen were on the conveyor belts at Glastonbury Recycling. Turds in bags? Come on, guys. I'm not every single
No!
day.
No!
Many dozens of them.
Many turns of bags.
Turds in
Oh
bags.
my God. Why?
You
Why?
thought I was coming here to talk about the Nordic model. You didn't know this one. You didn't know about this.
Jesus. But yes, it just goes to show that, you know, I'm sure you didn't enjoy rifling through bags of turd, but you still, if you weren't paid for your work or if your manager was a creep, you would have legal recourse to do something about it, right? Even though I'm sure you didn't enjoy it. But I think what people get hung up about a lot with sex work is like, well, how can someone possibly enjoy that? And it's like, well, first of all, some people do. And second of all, who said we need to enjoy our work? Like, work is just for capitalism. Like, it's just a means to an end. Like,
yeah, exactly.
you don't need to enjoy
I think
it.
that's why I give those other examples, because I'm like, I have done other jobs, guys, and some of those jobs were disgusting. Like, some of those jobs involved things that most people would balk at the idea of. But yet we don't
Yeah.
go around campaigning. No one's campaigning to shut down care agencies because people find their work
Yeah.
disgusting. Are you kidding? Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Like, what
No, yeah.
is so special and specific about sex work that it's different from any other kind of work that we have to try and protect people from it? And importantly, we are talking about work, not coercion, not people who are forced into sex work, not people who've been trafficked or, you know, had no choice. We're talking about people who choose to do it. And that's really key. That's really significant, because we have to recognize people's agency. Even if they have limited choice, I think as a society, we have a hard time understanding that even people with limited choices still make choices. You know, they still make choices, even if they're between a rock and a hard place. Excuse me.
Yeah. I also think that people get really hung up about, like, they say there's this very dangerous narrative of like, oh, well, can you really consent to something if you don't have another choice? And I'm like, you do have another. If you don't have another choice, you are forced, and that's forced labor, that's exploitation, that's human trafficking. But if you don't, you can consent to something you don't enjoy. You can consent to something you'd actually rather not do, but at the moment of your choices, that's the best option. But I think people get very confused about what consent means. And I think it's so important that we know you can consent to things you don't enjoy.
Well, welcome to capitalism as well. I mean, like, literally, if you don't work for a living, who are you? Like, who, you know, are you lucky enough to be, you know, resourced enough that you have a passive income that you don't need to work? Well,
Yeah.
that's not most of us, you know, like,
Yeah.
we are required most people are required to work. It's like the number one thing that we're taught growing up is like we're all prepared. That's what school was for me. School just felt like this one big training camp for, like, you know, preparing us for a lifetime of toil, because, you know, that's what you'll do until you retire, and then you'll die, you know. And the idea of living, you know, a life of freedom, freedom of choice. You know, some of the sex workers I know have more freedom than, you know, most people that I can think of. So
Yeah. I feel like it's a trick, isn't it? It's a trick. Work. And the fact that we've demonized sex work, I think, is hugely down to the fact that sex work is, for a lot of people, like a loophole in capitalism. Like a capitalist patriarchy, like, you've told women that their bodies are valuable because you've used it for your gain. But then as soon as they use it for their own, and then they maybe start gaining financial freedom and like have more choice, the society we live in runs on the unpaid care work of women. And if they suddenly realize what their work is worth, we're fucked. We're fucked as a society.
Yeah, I agree with that. That it poses a threat. Sex work kind of, it poses a threat to those kind of structures and hegemonies that we've have been keeping this kind of system, this machine going for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
So, I mean, you've touched on this a lot, but I wanted to like get into like our key chat area, and so when we're talking about sex work and legislation around sex work, I always find that there's many people out there who do want to support sex workers and reduce stigma and violence that they face, but they just don't know enough about the criminalisation of sex work and what that means for sex workers, the different
Yeah.
types. And they run the risk of confusing things like legalisation with decriminalisation. And I think those people are often a little bit nervous to admit that they're not actually sure what the difference is. I feel like a lot of those people might be politicians. But I'd love to do a section here where I'm pretending that I am someone who is brand new to sex worker rights. I know nothing. And I ask you some questions as if I know nothing. So that if there is anyone listening who really does want to support sex workers but doesn't feel like they know enough to do that, they can listen and be like, aha, I know what I'm talking about now.
Yes.
Okay. So, Stacey, isn't sex work illegal? I thought it was illegal.
In the UK,
In the UK.
currently,
Yeah.
sex work is not illegal in the sense of it's not against the law to exchange sex or sexual services in return for money or payment of some kind. However, the way that UK law is set up is so that various ways that sex work is done is criminalised. So, for example, brothel keeping being the most sort of pertinent issue. As soon as you have two sex workers who operate together from inside one premises, the same place, that is technically a brothel. Even if they're not working there at the exact same time, even if they come and go at different points of the day. So brothel keeping is punishable with up to 7 years in prison. Other laws around sex work are like soliciting. So it's illegal to solicit on the street. It's illegal to for both parties, for the worker and the buyer. So curb crawling was made illegal many years ago. Various types of business kind of activity. So, for example, if you're a sex worker, but you have a person who manages your bookings for you, takes your clients, requests, and just is like a manager of some kind, and you pay them a part like for that job, that's illegal. So a person who is working for a sex worker knowingly is breaking the law.
Like a security guard?
Like a driver, like a person who is there to support you and to back you up. Exactly. That's kind of where we're at in the UK. It's not that the act itself is criminalised. It's just that all of the ways around, all of the things that we have to do in order to make that work happen is criminalised in some way.
Almost like it's a trap.
But interestingly enough, stripping and strip clubs and lap dancing has been legalised via this licensing that I was talking about earlier on. So lap dancing happens to be one of the only parts of the sex industry which is not criminalised. And so a person who runs a strip joint and can take 50% of what the dancers earn, as much as they like, because that's not regulated. The way strip club bosses run their businesses is an absolute shocker. And if
I literally say they've got naked women and alcohol and their businesses are still failing. Like, these are the type of businessmen we're talking about when we're talking about strip club.
And so, weirdly, that's one of the only businesses that you can be in the UK and not be breaking the law as an operator.
So what exactly is decriminalisation, and what's the difference between decrim and legalisation? Lots of people think, it should just be legalised, but is that, would you say
so there are 4 main regulations, legal frameworks for sex work globally. There is criminalisation, there is legalisation, there is partial decriminalisation, which is what we're currently talking about, the Nordic Model, and then there's full decriminalisation. The best way to understand the difference between legalisation and decriminalisation is who has the power. Under legalisation, the only way to legalise something is to give permits. It's for the government or the state to grant permission. And they do that via usually licensing regimes. So best example of that would be look at Amsterdam, look at the Netherlands. The red light district, it's all heavily licensed. The windows and the brothels and the sex businesses, they're given permission by the state via a license. But the state has made a decision, we're going to put all the sex businesses in one area with the booze and the drugs, with the cafes and the bars. So they've created a kind of ghetto. They've ghettoized sex work, and then also put it in the middle of the most kind of rowdy, leery, difficult to manage environment you can think of. The state, under legalisation, the state, they take a cut, don't they? Via license fees. They get to decide who has a license. They get to decide where and when, license operating hours. So in a way, under legalisation, the state is actually like a pimp. The state is in control who gets to work, where, when, how, and they get a cut. Now, under full decriminalisation, the state has decided that sex work is a job and therefore can be regulated and seen and treated like a job under employment law, like any other job. So sex work would then be regulated and controlled under the same laws that we have that protect people at work. So, for example, health and safety laws, employment laws, things like the right not to be sexually harassed at work. A worker under full decrim, a worker can access their rights like literally just like any other worker. The best way, my example that I always give is look at New Zealand. In 2004, New Zealand fully decriminalised sex work. And then 10 years later, a brothel worker took her boss to court. So the brothel keeper who was taken to court, he was sexually harassing his employees. She sued him, took him to court, and got $25,000 in compensation. Because of course she should. Because of course she should have the right to work safely. And currently in the UK, sex workers can't do that because brothel keeping is illegal. Because if you're working illegally and if you have a manager or an agency boss or someone who's pushing you around, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to go to the police and report it and then risk them investigating you? Risk them shutting down the entire gig? The place that you're working from indoors might be one of the only safe places that you have to work yourself. Do you want to risk losing that? Do you want to risk putting everyone else out of work, all the other people that work there? Do you want to risk, a lot of bad things can happen. So under full decriminalisation, sex work becomes a business and a job like any other business, and we're allowed to organise. We then have the freedom to organise ourselves either independently or collaborate with other business operators, let's say managers, to create just normal workplaces.
Yeah, I think that's what people get confused about. Often, a lot of strippers will complain about strip club management, myself included, but it's not because the answer that a lot of anti-sex work feminist groups will come up with is, let's shut down your place of work. Let's shut down all strip clubs because this person doesn't like the management. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, I didn't like the management in a lot of my jobs. Like in Wetherspoons, I had awful management, but if there is a manager that is behaving poorly, you should have the recourse to be able to report that and get that dealt with, not people being like, right, well, then you should leave your job and we should shut down the industry.
I mean, are we going to try to start saying oh, the abuse that happens in the sex industry is the only abuse that we care about and we're going to do anything about, and ignore, I mean, Jesus, what was Me Too? What was, any of the scandals? The police, like, what?
Yeah. Did they say that about acting? Like, no one
Right?
after the Me Too movement, like by this logic that they use with sex work, then after Me Too, they should be like, oh, these actresses, like, what did they expect? We should just shut down
Yeah.
acting. Like, everyone knows that that's illogical and would just let perpetrators get away with their behavior.
Yeah. No, it's wild. It is absolutely
Yes.
wild, because the same people who campaign to shut down strip joints are just turning a blind eye to all the other kinds of, gender violence elsewhere.
Wasting their energy on,
Yeah.
it's
Literally, like,
so
what's
crazy.
the statistic? University of Leeds did research into the football, whenever
Oh,
England
yes.
play in a tournament, if they lose, gender violence in the area and in the country goes up by like 36%, and if they win, it goes up by 27. Something like that. We could fact check that if you want.
Yeah. Yeah, but I do remember that because I remember they started saying it was debunked. Is that a word?
Debunked.
Debunked. It was this other statistic that I heard them throwing around was that, oh, wherever there's a strip club, within a mile radius of the strip club, violence against women is higher. And first of all, they couldn't actually prove that they'd have found that evidence. But also, even if they had, it's like, what are you talking about? That's because they normally are. Strip clubs are normally, like you said, in areas with bars and clubs and places people watch football and drink alcohol. And it's not like correlation doesn't equal causality. But then if we are going to say that correlation does equal causality, we look at football matches and the violence that women face after that, win or lose. No one's banning football because lots of people make lots of money off of football, but no one it's the hypocrisy is.
Here we are. I found it. When England
breathtaking.
lose a football match, gender-based violence increases by 38%. When they win, it increases by 26%.
Yeah, it's wild. And you mentioned before part decriminalisation, which I believe is also called the Nordic Model or the end demand model. What does that mean,
So
Stacey?
this one is like the most kind of slippery. It's sort of a bit of a kind of shapeshifter in terms of how people talk about it. And it is kind of confusing because it is very much pitched to the public as decrim, as in, we're going to decriminalise sex work. We're going to decriminalise the sex workers. So what it does is it removes the criminal burden from the seller to the buyer. So it's about criminalising people who pay for sex, specifically the clients. And it's pitched as a feminist law because most people who sell sex are women, and therefore we're going to decriminalise the women in the situation, so they won't be they won't be investigated or treated like criminals. But all of the evidence and the statistics and the anecdotal kind of everything that is coming out of the countries that have run this model. So countries that have already introduced the Nordic model would be France, Canada, Israel, the Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, Republic of Ireland. It doesn't make it better or safer for sex workers. What it does is it makes it more difficult for sex workers to screen their clients, to ask for ID, to ask for a deposit in advance, to it doesn't make it better. It just makes you've driven away. First of all, it drives away good quality clients, the ones who were like easy to work with. They're not going to want to risk losing their careers or their lives. It's too much of a risk to them. But then what's left over are the people who are willing to break the law, the risk takers, the ones who are, you know, throwing caution to the wind, who might be drunk, who might be high. So, you know, it pushes people into more high stakes, stressful interactions with their clients. Anyone who is working outdoors, it's gonna, it's not working. It's gonna make people make decisions faster, and yeah, I don't know what to say.
Yeah. Well, they say it decriminalizes the worker, right? And on paper, yeah, but
On paper,
isn't it true that, like, if they know that if they want to catch clients and they know that a woman living at a certain address is a sex worker, they're going to be surveilling that place, right? To be able to catch clients, and then the sex workers being surveilled by police, and then so it's not. They are like by proxy still
yeah,
criminalized, but it it's it's technicalities that like in an ideal world, whatever, but it doesn't exist. That doesn't exist. It's been tried and
yeah,
tested, and it's always increased violence against
yeah.
workers.
It's criminalizing. If you criminalize something, you criminalize something that humans are going to do, then you've created a criminal marketplace. I keep on saying this, like, I feel like a stuck record. I've been saying this for the last like 10 years or something, that criminalization is not a win for feminism, because criminal
Yep.
marketplaces are run by criminals. Um, you're not
Yep.
ending the demand. There's no evidence coming out of any of those countries that the demand suddenly goes away. I think the Nordic model, or the partial decriminalisation model, the end demand model, is literally about saying on paper what has been done to protect women, or to do something for, you know, to end violence against women and girls. I think on paper, as a piece of legislation, it sounds good, but in practice, it's not achieving any of that. Like it's all, like I say, all of the countries that have rolled this law out, it's not made it any better for people who do sex work. Like I
Yeah.
say, it's left this kind of vacuum, into which, you know, people who break the law and are comfortable breaking the law will continue operating.
Yeah. And if you're saying it's just it's just so from a privileged point of view to think that taking away someone's work or their clients, like their paying customers, taking them away will help that person in any
Mhm.
way. Like if you don't like the idea of something, that's one thing. Like you can talk about whether or not you'd like to do sex work, but as soon as you say like I don't like sex work, so I think the all of the
Mhm.
clients should be
Yeah.
criminalized, then what are you doing to make sure that the women and the people selling sex have viable alternatives that can make the same amount of money in the same amount of time as sex work? And the reason that sex work's been, one of the longest standing professions is because there isn't very many other
Mhm.
jobs where you can actually make a living and not have to spend your whole life at a desk or, back breaking labor, which is also using your body.
Well, yeah, it's also a very paternalistic and patronizing approach to label all um, uh, buyers of sex as abusers. It's almost as if
Hmm.
saying, well, sex workers can't tell the difference, right? It's like, it takes away our agency and our ability to actually call out abuse when it's abuse, when
Yeah.
we experience actual abuse. But by saying, but you're a victim, inherently, your job itself, it's really, it's one of the most kind of aggressive misrepresentations of sex work, I think, when people sort of look at someone like me or someone like you or any of us and say, well, all the people who've ever paid you for sexual services have abused you just don't know it. Like, that is a mind fuck, excuse my language, but that's it.
No, please.
Yeah, that's it. That's all I
And saying we can't understand what we consent to
know.
is such a
It is.
dangerous
Yeah.
narrative. Like we would never say to a woman who wasn't a sex worker who says this man touched me or assaulted me, we would never say, yeah, but do you know what assault is? Like, do you know? And the irony that sex workers probably know more than anyone what is and what isn't consensual is so ironic to me. Like, I feel like women and workers can be exploited in the gray areas, and in sex work there's much more black and white, and it's harder to exploit women in sex work than it is in other industries that uses their sexuality for profit, like namely acting and like maybe modeling. Like, that is using your body to earn a living, and like your youth, your sexuality.
Yeah, I think it's a really dangerous precedent to go down. It's almost as dangerous as you say, if you give the example of like someone who alleges that they've been assaulted, for example. Nowadays, I think perhaps as a society would be more inclined to believe women when they say they've been assaulted or abused. But historically, that's not the case. Historically, oh, did they really? Are you sure you weren't drunk? Are you sure you weren't asking for it? Like that,
Yeah.
But so what we've got going on with sex work or sex workers now is almost like the opposite of that. It's like us saying, we know when we haven't been abused. We know that when we consented to perform sexual services in return for, payment reward of some kind, it wasn't abuse. I didn't experience that as abuse. But yet the rest of society is saying, but do you even know your own mind, though? You're conditioned, aren't you?
Yep.
Did you brought up,
Yep.
you're a certain way, like, and then all of those layers of kind of disbelieving.
If we're going to say believe women, it has to be believe them when they say it was non-consensual, but believe them when they say it was consensual. Yeah. Like I've been doing some press for this podcast, and I was asked a lot about Lily Phillips and Bonnie Blue, and my biggest opinion is we are wasting so much time and energy. They are women doing what they want to do. It's perfectly legal. They're profiting off of their sexuality. Leave them alone. And people were getting so hung up on the fact that, well, Lily Phillips cried after a 12-hour day of having sex with men. And I was like, there's many 12-hour shifts that I've cried after. And what she actually said was the reason she was upset in that documentary was because the men that came, she felt really guilty because she wanted to give them a good service and provide something for them. But a lot of them were like, oh, what do you mean I can't come? What do you mean I've only got 90 seconds? What the fuck? And I was like, sounds like the men again are the problem in this situation. And I've had many clients at like Weatherspoons, any type of customer, who have treated me like shit, and maybe I've cried about it. But if I then say, you know what, no, but I still like my job. I've had a hard day, but I still want to do this job. People are like, okay. Whereas with her, there's very much this narrative of like, yeah, but she can't possibly know whether she likes it or not. It's terrifying, that narrative. You're saying she doesn't know what she's consenting to. We can't pull on that string. That's terrible.
I got approached by Newsnight, and they were like, we want to have a live debate after this interview with Lily Phillips. And I was like, talking to the researcher on the phone, and she was like, so what's your opinion? I was literally like, sorry, I don't have an opinion. Like, do you want me to talk about the Nordic model instead? Do you want me to talk about like legislation? Because literally this is like...
Yeah. We are talking about people having sex. Yeah. They're not even charging directly for it. Like, what's the problem? Like, I do not understand. And I get very nervous when I hear that Bonnie Blue is being banned from entering certain countries where sex work is legal. Because I'm like, okay, what we're saying here is we are setting a precedent that promiscuous women are not allowed to are not allowed to go places and be places. They're not doing anything illegal, but we don't personally like it, and we have a right to ban her from places because of that. That leads to any promiscuous woman being banned and then criminalized. And then, honestly, people think I'm being extreme, but I'm like, this is the start of Handmaid's Tale.
That was literally what laws were when they were first. The Contagious Diseases Act in the 1860s was this. It was legislators deciding that women needed to be controlled, not men. Like, yeah, it's
it's all about telling women that they should adapt their behavior to allow for the poor behavior of men. And all that energy, if it was spent educating men on how to behave properly, I really think that none of this would be a non-issue. Because, I mean, the fact that we have been talking about the epidemic of violence against women for decades, and especially in the last 5 years, and yet it took a television show written actually by the same guy who wrote Skins, or wrote some of Skins. It took Adolescence, a TV show, to get MPs to be like, maybe we should think about educating young people about how bad misogyny is and how dangerous these characters on YouTube are, that we shouldn't just listen to what they say and take it as gospel. But sex worker rights organizations have been shouting about this for years, but no one cares.
But the worry is, though, that this Nordic model, it goes hand in hand with that idea that, we should educate men, we should do something about the men, we should, intervene. The Nordic model, it kind of is like a beautiful, beautifully wrapped up with a bow kind of gift to those kind of legislators, because it's literally about the men. It's a piece of legislation that will legislate, end demand. But it's not going to work, because guess what? The demand isn't caused by men, it's caused by poverty. If you create conditions in which more people do sex work, and then money is flowing upwards to the super rich, you're not, what we do, if we want to end abuses in the sex industry, we have to create an equal society, and that starts with wealth redistribution. It starts with bringing people into the same equality of opportunity, which we just don't have. We have so much more work to do. For people to say, oh, the Nordic model is going to solve that problem, it really will not, because if you don't do anything about if you don't do anything about the conditions in which people, this is another thing that I say often in my shows, is if a woman is being exploited in the sex industry, she has already been failed by every other level of society. She's been failed, no doubt, in terms of housing, education, healthcare, employment. It's not, that doesn't just happen in a vacuum. People don't just get snatched off the street. That myth of people just having normal. And another thing that I feel that feminist organizations do is they don't talk about they want to work for a certain type of woman, but another type of woman, it's a bit tricky.
Exactly. The classism is interwoven.
Classism is rife. Sorry, I don't know if that's a valuable point.
No, that's absolutely, that is all part of it. And I think you made such a good point. I could never think of the best way to word things, but it's such a great point that they're saying, oh, we'll end demand. We need to end demand. And I think what they're thinking is, we'll end the demand for sex work. We'll end the demand for sex because we will criminalize it. First of all, you are not going to stop people wanting to have sex. But I think what they're confusing is that the sex industry exists not because of the demand for sex, the demand for money. Not even the demand, the absolute essential need of money. So you're right. They're saying end demand, but they're going about it like they're trying to end the demand for sex, which will never happen. But what they need to do is go about it and trying to end the demand for money. If people are not let's say you want, I do think some people enjoy sex work, but again, I don't think you need to enjoy it to be able to have labor rights. But let's say some people are in it because they like their job, but let's say other people are in it because they don't like it, they hate it, but it works the best at the moment and there isn't that many other options. Why aren't you trying to make other options for them? Why aren't you reforming the benefit system? Why aren't you reforming healthcare?
Absolutely.
It just doesn't make any sense. But I think deep down it is because the kind of privileged people that have these moral discussions about, oh, we should just end the demand for sex work, are the kind of people that have probably never had to make those difficult decisions and can't comprehend that actually sometimes this would be the best option, and that criminalising your clientele is not the way to support them.
Yeah, absolutely. It is just like the complete wrong end of the stick to say the drivers of the sex industry are male desire, male sexual gratification, and then do nothing at all, or don't address the social drivers, which are poverty. I mean, like, if you have violent, abusive men, and you create a pool of vulnerable women who are at risk of criminalisation, at on the poverty line, abusers know where their victims are. Abusers go after vulnerable people, right? They know the profile of who to kind of prey on. But so why don't you do something to support those people? Why don't you do something kind of materially, like look at universal basic income? Look at, I don't see those same people who want to campaign to end the sex industry campaigning for major overhaul in other
Yep.
areas of society that would see women particularly just be a lot less vulnerable. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, the drivers, as
It
far as
is.
I'm concerned, the drivers of sex work, or the drivers of sexual exploitation, are, sex is part of it. But why wouldn't you do something to protect people from it, instead of trying to just go after the perpetrators? And what do you think you're going to do? Round them all up and throw away the key? No, create a society where they have less room to maneuver. There aren't spaces that they can go and abuse people,
Yeah.
because they just won't
Yeah.
exist. Like, it's the wrong.
It's got to be multi-pronged, right? Like, so me thinking, oh, we need to educate young kids about like misogyny and whatever. I feel like that hopefully will help the next
Yeah,
generation grow up and not be so misogynistic. But we currently live with many generations that have already had like they've lived in a society that where women are not treated as equal. And I feel like if we are just going to try and, you know what, like criminalizing sex work just seems like they think it's going to be this easy option to sort a lot
yeah,
of society's problems about gender inequality. But it's like, no, you're spilling up puddles of milk, and the big jar that's fallen over is like the benefit system, the healthcare system. Like, there's women aren't valued as men are in
yeah,
society. And instead of just being like, well, no, you're not allowed to do the thing that will help, even though we're not going to help you get back on your feet and help in other ways, you're not allowed to do what can help you survive. And I just think it's such a cop out. It's like for them to be seen to be doing
mm,
something by saying, oh, well, we're going to criminalize sex buyers. But yeah, you scratch just below the surface and it's like, no, they don't actually want to do anything. They just need to be seen to be trying. I don't think that why are we talking about sex work specifically when we're talking about men like behaving abhorrently? Like, women get assaulted and murdered by men and hurt by men all the time. The reason that like it's like a lot of the time sex workers get hurt by violent men is because the laws make them easy
yeah,
targets. And these perpetrators, if they could get their hands on any other women just as easily, I'm sure they would. But the fact that the law criminalizes parts of sex work means that sex workers aren't as safe to go to police when something happens. And perpetrators of violence
yeah.
know that. And so it really is the state that is making it easier for violent men to access sex workers and harm
Exactly.
them.
Exactly. And that's, like I say, going back to that example of New Zealand with the brothel worker who took her boss to court for sexual harassment in the workplace. That is just the best example I can think of what the difference between these laws, by
Yeah.
enabling and opening a legal pathway for sex workers to have the same rights and protections as any other worker, is the best way forward for us. Is not,
Yeah.
and again, criminalizing any part of the sex industry. You create criminal burden, criminal marketplaces. People who operate within those criminal kind of underbellies are comfortable breaking the law, are risk takers. They are not, they're unsavory characters. And, look at other examples where, like, the full decriminalisation of substances and drugs in Portugal. They fully decriminalised drugs years ago, and the black market more or less isn't there. The drug dealers just left because the people can get what they need.
You are making it valuable by criminalising it, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is what I say. If there wasn't so much shame and stigma around women's sexuality, sex work wouldn't be as viable a source of income as it is, because people tell us like, oh, it's shameful to do that. It's shameful to do that. That less people want to do it, and that means it's worth more money. So if there wasn't shame, I don't think sex work would be as easy to. Well, not as easy. It's not easy, but it would be harder to make money off of nudity and sexuality if everybody was happy with nudity and sexuality.
I'd never thought of that. I'd never thought of that point, that under decrim, sex work itself, like, it's danger money, right? Sex workers can earn like a lot of money because it's seen as this stigmatized, quite sort of dangerous thing, and they're doing it. It's all very hush hush and behind closed doors. But actually, if we were to, well, that remains to be seen, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm sure
about the value of sex or the value of sexual services, if it was not illegal, that would be an interesting. I'd never thought of that.
Yeah, I just find it funny that the anti-sex work groups have not thought about that, because I'm like, if you really, really don't want people doing sex work, you talking about how horrible it is and how degrading it is, you are making it more valuable because less people want to do it because they're ashamed and they're stigmatized and the laws are against them. So you are making it more valuable. Like, I don't understand. I mean, I'm not looking for logic in illogical places. Like, anti-sex work groups are not logical, but it just is funny to me that their arguments are so easily unraveled. So I think we know that the Nordic model is not a good idea. But coming from the point of view of someone who has no idea again, like, what can I do as a regular civilian that really doesn't want the Nordic model to be implemented? And when should I do that?
So there is right now a public consultation that is live. If you want to, and you should, if you want to support sex workers, please write to your MP. Go to National Ugly Mugs or Decrim Now or English Collective of Prostitutes. Go on their websites, go on their social media pages. They have really valuable resources to help you understand this issue better. They have template letters that you can send to your MPs. Generally, we're hoping that people don't just send hundreds of templates because they tend to be just ignored. So if you can personalize your message in some way, introduce yourself, tell whoever you're writing to why you're writing, in what context. Are you a friend of a sex worker? Are you, a member of the public who's concerned? Just tell them who you are and why you want them to listen. And the deadline for the public consultation to make submissions is the 13th of May. So that's pretty soon, a couple of weeks away. We are also, as far as I know, because Decrim Now are doing a lot of social media about this, and it's great. As far as I know, most MPs are not in support of this law. It is a small number of MPs that are pushing very, very hard. It's not to say that it might not happen, but if the law does get passed and the Nordic model is implemented, then you're going to hear about it, right? The one thing I've learned about the sex working community in the last 5-10 years is that we've become extremely active and mobilized and, ready to make a stink. So you can expect to hear about protests, and we'll be ready for a fight if the law is implemented. So the general sense is, don't panic. Do what you can. Rattle off an email. You can. It's not difficult. I've been in touch with my local MPs and MSPs. Just find out where their office is, contact the secretary, find out when the surgery is. Just do that much for us, and it will matter.
And I'll put links to all of those websites that you just mentioned in the show
Yeah.
notes so people can easily find the templates and stuff. So I think, let's round off the podcast on a lighter note. So I've learned a lot from my experiences in sex work and my experiences in like civilian work. And I've learned a lot of lessons, and some of them I wish I could turn around and say to my younger self, hey, don't do that. This is the lesson you'll learn, but you don't need to do it to find out. Do you have anything like this where it's like a life lesson that you learned the hard way that you'd rather not have?
Yeah, I think that in society right now we have a dearth of care, like as in care for each other, care for ourselves, self-care. I think that if I could go back in time and talk to my 19-year-old self, I'd be like, do more to like keep yourself well. Like all of the things that you do, like eating well, sleeping well, taking care of your body, like they will matter most later on in life. It's not the amount of money that you earn, it's not the amount of stuff that you have. It's like health is wealth. And like we are at a critical point in society, I think, when it comes to like healthcare, trying to get a doctor's appointment. Like, good luck to you if you have been diagnosed with a chronic illness. Like it's really bad. So if I could, if the message I want to send out to my younger, the new generation of sex workers and any young people really, is like, don't push it so hard. Like you might feel invincible now, but if you're running on adrenaline, just that's going to do some damage later on. Go easy on the substances. Human life is precious, like we're all kind of vulnerable to some extent. And if you're out there on your own and you don't have, rich daddy to fall back on, if you don't have a family home, if you don't have, food in the fridge, if you don't come from that, like, level of kind of resources and sort of class mobility, if you are out there on your own, we rely on each other so much. Do what you can to build community in your life, create an ecosystem of caring and looking after each other, like an ecosystem of having fun. Yeah, great, do that as well, but have an ecosystem in your life where there's food in the fridge and you've got a bed to sleep in, even if it's shared. Make it a nice bed. Like, look after yourself. That's what I would want to say.
You've done a huge amount. I mean, all of this will be in the show notes, but I was looking up bios for you and I was like, oh my God, she's done so much. I'm not going to be able to fit this. But where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? Do you have any specific goals that you want to achieve in the near future?
Oh, geez. Not especially. I'm at an interesting point in my life where I feel like I've done a lot of the things that I wanted to do, but I'm also kind of coming to terms with the life of running around on fumes, and pushing it and running on adrenaline. And so I turned 40 last year. I'm now trying to just kind of slow down and calm down and really kind of prioritize just the most meaningful things. Like, we have each other. Like, that's kind of all there is. Like, I was saying this to Joe King when we met yesterday. It's like all the rest is all just stuff. Like all of the projects and the dreams and the ambitions, like that's all nice. It's nice to do things that you want to do, but like health is wealth, and we are healthier when we are in ecosystems of people who love us and who we look after each other. So I don't know, where do I see myself in 10 years? Growing herbs somewhere in a community garden,
Commune situation.
what?
I'm trying to rope my friends into a commune situation.
Yeah, come to Scotland. There's plenty of that up here. Yeah, just doing something kind of meaningful, but surrounded by people, like immersed
Yeah,
community. That's all I really
yeah.
want now. Um,
Oh, I think that's amazing. I think that's such a great goal to have. And finally, where can listeners find you?
so listeners can find me. You can find me on social media, but I'm not that active on there since sex workers are more or less censored on most social media platforms. I'm reluctant to use them, but you can find me on
Mhm.
Instagram as Ethical Stripper or on Facebook as Stacey Clare. But if you want to really like come and see me, I'll be performing at Brighton Fringe this coming 2nd of May to the 18th with my show Ask a Stripper. And then I'll be doing Durham Fringe the 23rd, 24th, 25th of July. And then Edinburgh Fringe, which runs from the 31st of July to the 24th of August. But I'm also going to be doing 2 shows at Edinburgh this year. I'm going to be doing Ask a Stripper. And then in the afternoon, I'm doing the Strippers Advice Bureau. If you have a dilemma and you want 2 ropey old strippers to solve your problems, then come along. It's going to be funny. And we may or may not also be doing secret illegal stripper parties in Edinburgh throughout Fringe, but you have to come. It's invite only, it's word of mouth, password only. People want to find out more. You've got to come and see us in person at one of the shows.
I can personally highly recommend that you find this invite because I went to one of these last year, and
You were at our.
can we mention a specific stunt? Maybe we won't say who did it, but there was a trick with fire and a penis, and that's all I'll say.
Well, you need to say. You want to see someone set fire to their own dick? Come along to Edinburgh Fringe this year. Come and check it out. You might be in luck. And also,
And if that doesn't get you to Edinburgh Fringe, I don't know what will.
exactly. And also, speaking of Edinburgh, I'm also doing running stripper life drawing classes in Edinburgh at the Dragonfly on the last Tuesday of every month. So if people want to, any listeners in Edinburgh or central part of Scotland, come along. We're running stripper life drawing.
Yeah, you can support sex workers and also feel artistic and creative doing it. So win-win. Stacey, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. And I really think I'm going to tell everyone who asks me about the different models of criminalisation just to listen to this episode. So you've saved me a lot of mental energy. So thank you. Thank you for getting up early.
Thank you for listening to my early morning waffle. Not the most articulate interviews I've ever given.
No, we love it. Very articulate. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you again. Take care.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Really Good Exposure with me, Megan Prescott. If you like the podcast, please subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on future episodes. And if you're feeling extra generous, give it a nice review. If you want to find me online, my Instagram is @Megatron. That's MEGARTRON. Threads, I'm also Megatron. I'm on X, the artist formerly known as Twitter, @Meg_Prescott. And you can find a number of ridiculous videos involving me on my YouTube channel by searching youtube.com/Megan Audition. You can find more information about me and what I'm up to on my website, meganprescott.com. If you have any questions that you'd like me and my guests to try to advise you on, please send them in to megartron@protonmail.com. And I will answer the ones I think I could give the worst advice to. I'm just joking, I give excellent advice. This episode was brought to you by me, Megan Prescott. Recording, editing, and post-production by Adam Grigg. Original music also by Adam Grigg. Thanks again for listening and for all of the really good exposure. A lot of the topics that we talk about on Really Good Exposure relate to women's rights, worker rights, and the sorry state that both of those are in right now. I believe that women have the right to choose what they do with their bodies and how they make their money. And I believe that how we choose to use our bodies should never, ever alleviate perpetrators of violence from accountability. I believe that all workers deserve basic human rights and protections. And I believe that predators are always responsible for violence, not victims. If you agree, please consider donating to National Ugly Mugs. National Ugly Mugs is a pioneering national organisation that provides greater access to justice and protection for sex workers. Sex workers are often targeted by dangerous individuals and face obstacles to reporting, access to services, and police protection. Those who harm sex workers offend against all of us. You can donate to National Ugly Mugs using the link in the show notes, and you can follow National Ugly Mugs on Instagram at National Ugly Mugs. Thank you.